Ramona Moon was a mortuary cosmetologist. She realized that most people found this to be gross, bordering on disgusting, and she had been told many times that her job was macabre. But she loved bringing beauty to the dead. She had completed cosmetology school only a year ago. After graduation, she had gotten lucky and been able to apprentice under Gordon St. Pierre, a kindly old man who had performed this service for the deceased of Nevermore Hollows for 50 years. Gordon retired a few weeks back, and due to a wonderful recommendation from him, Ramona had landed her first real job in the industry with the Lamentation Brothers Funeral Home. On Gordon's last night as her mentor, he had said something very cryptic.
Dear girl, I want to caution you to always be vigilant for things that seem strange.
They had been applying makeup to a woman named Agnes de Graff, who had been found strangled to death in her bathtub. What do you mean? She asked. Gordon tugged at his gray Van Dyke, as if unsure on how best to proceed.
Ramona, you have a pure heart. You have been graced with the ability to see the beauty in this world, and it has led you to try to bring beauty to death. But that is impossible to do because death is an ugly thing that never should have existed. What's more is that I believe death is a real entity that brings rot to everything he touches in this realm. And at the time of someone's passing, all we can do is reduce the ugliness of this rot just a tiny bit by applying our trade with a skilled hand. As you continue to see the rot death causes, I pray it never taints your optimism, because that's the only way that death can be defeated.
The pleading tone of his voice made her take pause from trying to match poor Agnes's skin tone, so to cover the bruising around her throat. I'm sorry, but I still don't think I follow what you're trying to say. Gordon seemed to decide to go all in.
You may think me an old fool, but I believe in the spirit realm. I believe it is inhabited by creatures that are in the service of this entity called death, and I believe that these servants of death cause a lot of terrible things that happen in this world. Take, for instance, poor Agnes. See these marks on her neck? Clearly, they are of fingers, tiny fingers, not those of an adult. Moments before she was murdered, she called 911 and confessed to accidentally killing Riley Rosedale, the little boy who went missing last year. She told the operator that he had come to get his revenge. The operator heard Agnes being strangled, and worse, a childish giggle. I believe that Riley Rosedale's body was used by one of these creatures in service to death to come back for dear Agnes.
Ramona had felt that Gordon was a bit superstitious based on some of his past comments. But listening to his confession, she wondered if it was simply the sad musings of an old man who wasn't long for needing the services he'd spent his whole life providing. But Gordon had been so kind to her, to the point of becoming more than a mentor. He had become a father figure. So, out of love for the old man, she nodded, as if taking his words to heart. This is a lot to process, Gordon. Thank you for sharing with me, and I promise I will always be open to anything that seems strange. Gordon frowned.
I can see you don't believe.
Ramona had lovingly put her hand on his shoulder. I'm sorry, Gordon. I just never believed in all that spiritual stuff. Gordon reached up and patted the hand she had on his shoulder.
Neither did I at your age, but I've come to understand that when one comes face to face with the truth of the supernatural evil, they tend to change their minds. Just promise me to be vigilant.
Ramona saw in his eyes the intensity of his belief. She nodded. I promise. Gordon gave her a hopeful look.
Should you ever see anything paranormal, seek safety first. Then call Sheriff Mosley or Alyssa Hart, the coroner. They will know what to do, but if you can't get away, then know that words have power.
Ramona attempted to lighten the mood of the conversation. I thought sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me.
Dear girl, I don't know why we ever teach our kids that little nugget of misinformation. If words have no power, why do Satanists utter evil chants and witches call out dark incantations? And why do people of various religions pray? The right words can go a long way in defending yourself against evil entities.
Gordon retired the next day, and the Lamentation brothers, Otto and Lazarus, hired her to be their mortuary cosmetologist, and she had been quite busy ever since. The funeral home was in the old part of town in a massive Victorian that seemed to crouch atop a small hill. It had lots of rooms that the brothers had turned into various viewing parlors. But the biggest room at the back of the house was where they performed embalming and she applied the makeup on the decedents. It was also where the crematory was located. After being hired, she had decided to do her work at night so that she was out of the way and because she liked the quiet. It was almost 10 p.m. on a Friday night, which just happened to be her birthday, not that she ever cared to celebrate it, when she began applying her skills to a man named Norman Rooks. Just as she applied a bit of color to Norman's lips, she heard a commotion outside. She laid down her brush and glanced out the window. Alyssa Hart, the coroner and medical examiner, had backed her 66 VW bus up to the receiving doors. Ramona had not met Alyssa, but had heard that she was quirky, like how she used the bus painted white and powder blue to transport bodies instead of a black van. The sheriff arrived in his 1955 Willis 4x4 pickup, which he had lovingly restored to its full rugged glory, and the Lamentation brothers pulled up in their 1959 Chevy Nomad hearse. She figured they were here to deliver a body, so she opened the door for them. She watched as they unloaded a stretcher containing a body bag from the back of the bus and rolled it into the embalming room. Otto took a moment to introduce her to the sheriff and the coroner. Otto looked completely different from Lazarus, though they were twins. Otto was average height, but Lazarus stood over 6 feet. Otto was balding. Lazarus had a full head of thick, wavy hair. Otto was talkative, and Lazarus was usually quiet, but when Lazarus did speak, it seemed to carry the insight and wonder of a curious man who was new to this world. It was even more curious that he seemed to walk with a slight off-kilter gait, as if one leg was a fraction of an inch longer than the other, and when he smiled, it seemed as if his teeth were not his own.
"This is Ramona Moon,"
Otto said.
"She is our new mortuary cosmetologist. Ramona, This is Alyssa Hart and Sheriff Cotton Mosley.
Alyssa was 50, with red hair, hazel eyes, and a warm smile. She surprised Ramona with a sisterly hug. "It's so good to meet you, sweetheart," she said. Cotton was average height, but had the aura of a warrior who preferred peace. He removed his Stetson and shook her hand. "Gordon speaks highly of you."
So, what do we have here?
Otto said, looking at the body bag. "A John Doe," Cotton replied. "We found him behind Winona's Waffle Hut last night. He was naked, and we found no clothing anywhere near the site. Alyssa conducted an autopsy and can find no discernible cause of death. We held the body for a whole day while we tried to make sure he wasn't wanted for any crimes, but he has no fingerprints, and none of his DNA pinged any of the federal databases."
Curious,
Lazarus said, his eyes brightening. For the first time, Ramona realized that he had one blue eye and one green.
No fingerprints?
"None," Alyssa said, "and there is no scarring at all to indicate that he used acid or had them surgically removed. It's like this man was born without fingerprints. As you can see, we had to use a very large body bag because he's pushing 7 feet tall." Otto stepped over to the gurney.
Well, let's take a look.
He unzipped the body bag. The man was big and built like a Greek athlete. His head was shaved on both sides, but was crowned with a high, spiky mohawk that was dyed bright red.
So, what are we to do with him?
Lazarus said. "We have his DNA, and I took pictures in case we ever need them," Alyssa said. "Cotton and I spoke, and we feel it would be best if the body was cremated." Alyssa paused a moment, then said, "Tonight."
It would be our pleasure to make that happen for you,
Otto said.
"We'll take care of it immediately."
He stepped over to the crematory that was set in the wall. He opened the door and gave a quick inspection. He then pushed a button beside the door, and there was a soft clang and a low hiss as the flames sprang hungrily to life. Then, in a moment of dark humor, he said,
"We'll make sure John Doe becomes Mr. Crispy in no time."
"I know it's late," Cotton said, "and we appreciate this. I'll push through the paperwork to pay extra for your trouble," Alyssa said. Ramona watched this conversation, feeling as if there was more going on here than it seemed. The vibe and flow of the conversation suggested that they were all in on some secret that they were trying to keep from her. "We'd like to stay and witness that the body is put into the crematory," Cotton said cryptically. "Then we'll just get out of your way." Otto and Lazarus exchanged a knowing look, and as the brothers lifted the body and put it inside the crematory, Alyssa turned to Ramona. "Sweetie, are you going to be working here much longer tonight?" "Yes," Ramona replied. "I have Mr. Rooks here and another I need to start on before calling it a night. I'll be here at least another 2 hours." Alyssa thoughtfully nibbled her lip. She turned to the brothers. "That's about how long it will take for the body to be fully destroyed. Are either of you staying?" Otto shut the crematory door and pulled down a lever that locked it in place.
"We had not planned on it. It's set on a timer. Besides, Ramona has been trained on what to do in case of a malfunction."
"I hit the big red button beside the door that shuts it off, then call Otto," Ramona said. "That's all good," Alyssa replied. but I just want to make sure that Ramona will be safe." Otto had a look on his face that seemed cryptic to Ramona.
"Ah, I see. I understand. Lazarus and I will stay for an hour before we go. That should be sufficient time to ensure that there are no issues with Mr. Crispy's cremation. Would that be acceptable?"
Alyssa thought it over, then said, "Yes, I think an hour should be plenty." She then turned to Ramona, handed her a business card. "Sweetie, here's my number. If you're ever here by yourself and you feel scared for any reason whatsoever, call me. If you can't get me, call Cotton." Cotton handed over his card with his personal phone number on it. "So what am I missing here?" Ramona said. "It seems there's more going on than meets the eye."
"If I may clarify,"
Lazarus said.
Nevermore Hollows has had its share of strange occurrences. Some of these things have caused some of the townsfolk quite a fright. Most are explainable.
"Most?" Ramona said.
"Oftentimes it's just kids playing dark pranks and such."
"That may be true in some cases, Otto," Alyssa said, "but it has gotten a lot stranger over the past few years, and with Ramona working late by herself in a funeral home, I just want to make sure she has the right people to contact should something ever happen." Alyssa turned to Ramona. "Sweetie, there are some terrible things out there, and nowhere is safe, especially not a funeral home. Just call me if you ever feel scared here or anywhere." With that, Cotton and Alyssa left, and the brothers went into other parts of the house and busied themselves by prepping for the next day's viewings, leaving Ramona in wonder at what all this spooky secrecy was about. An hour later, the brothers called out to her that they were leaving. Ramona heard them drive off, and she found herself alone with Mr. Rooks and the low hissing of the crematory as it transformed John Doe into Mr. Crispy. As she worked on Norman, she spoke to herself. Her work was lonely work. Filling the air with self-conversation helped break up the quiet, and it helped the time go by a bit faster. She also spoke to the dead. She knew that the body was an empty shell, but speaking to them seemed polite, and as strange as that sounded, she liked doing it. She brushed some foundation onto the dead man's face. "This will give your skin a touch of color, make it not seem so pale. I'm going to fix you right up, sir, make you look as handsome as when you were alive." She continued like this, speaking to Norman's body for 30 minutes or so as she brushed color onto his neck and hands. Then she began the next step of adding a touch of color to the lips. Not too much, she thought. Ramona prided herself on making it all look as lifelike and as true as possible to how the decedents presented themselves when alive. She stepped back to inspect her work. "I like it," she said aloud. "I think I'm making progress. Yes, sir, I am fixing you right up." Suddenly, there was a clang from the crematory. It rang out in the quiet of the room, startling Ramona. Worried that there was a problem, she stepped over and went through the checklist Otto and Lazarus had given her. She first checked to make sure the temperature was steady. It was heating at 1,700 degrees, like it should. She then checked the gas gauge. Plenty was left. She checked the ventilation safety gauge. It was also working properly. She shrugged and headed back to Mr. Rooks. She picked up a brush and continued her work. "Now," she said aloud, "this is going to help make you look just like they remember you." A moment later, there was another clang. She stopped again, her hands held above the body as she glanced up at the crematory. She stood like that for what seemed a very long time, with the hairs on the back of her neck tingling. 2 more clangs, and the lever-style door handle jiggled. It felt as if tiny spiders made of ice skittered down her spine, and her heart fluttered like a scared raven inside her chest. Ramona took a deep breath and chided herself for allowing such superstitious fear to take hold of her. She convinced herself that it must be a gas buildup. She put the brush aside and stepped back over to the crematory. She tapped the pressure gauge, but it remained steady and in the green. She stood silently for a moment, listening. A sense of unease squirmed its way from the pit of her stomach and wormed its way through her body. "Oh, stop being so melodramatic," she said. "You have let the events of this night make you jittery and easily spooked." The handle on the crematory door rattled again. Even though it was an older system, it was well insulated. But she was growing concerned that maybe there was a malfunction with the door and that it wasn't properly sealed. She snatched a pair of insulated gloves that hung on the wall beside the door, slipped them on, and tested the handle by giving it a slight jiggle. There was only minimal play, nothing out of the ordinary that she could tell. She then cautiously inspected the seal around the door. Even that looked good. She removed the gloves and hung them on the wall. The lever rattled again, this time more aggressively. She was now full-on concerned, and if she was honest, getting really spooked, so she decided it was time to call the Lamentation Brothers and let them know that something might be wrong with the crematory. She walked quickly over to the counter where she had left her phone. The door lever rattled again. This time, it was clearly purposeful. She repressed a scared squeal and snatched her phone. She turned and saw that the lever was moving up and down, up and down, as if being maneuvered by some ghostly hand. Then it seemed as if ice crystals bloomed in her blood when she remembered that the brothers had, as part of updated safety measures enforced by OSHA, installed a release handle on the other side of the door. She remembered them explaining to her that it was attached to the same mechanism as the lever on the front of the door. If you moved the lever on the inside, the lever on the outside would move as well. She began to shake. Her mind became fuzzy with fear, causing her to think irrationally. Instead of running from the room, then calling the brothers and Alyssa and the sheriff, she tried to use her phone with quivering hands. She dropped the phone onto the floor. It rattled under the embalming table. She dropped into a squat and snatched the phone, and as she stood, the crematory door cracked open an inch with a whoosh of heat and the amplified sound of the gas-fueled flames. Her eyes locked on the crematory door. The phone was forgotten in her hand. The room's temperature rose with each hammering beat of her heart. She began to sweat. From behind the door came a voice.
"Ramona, can you fix me?"
She tried to scream, but it got stuck in her throat. She could only emit a tiny groan. The crematory door swung open another 2 inches.
I'm on fire, Ramona. It burns.
A blackened hand crept through the crack, and charred fingers grasped the edge of the door and pushed. The door swung wide to reveal the mysterious dead man, who Otto had begun calling Mr. Crispy. He was seared black except for his teeth, which gleamed white. Somehow his red mohawk had survived the flames and was only singed black at the tips. His eyes glowed deep orange. He was lying on his stomach, those magma eyes locked onto hers, keeping her in his trance. Mr. Crispy began to crawl out of the flames. He pulled himself forward, head first into the room. Because of his unnatural height, his arms were long enough to allow him to put his hands on the floor, then pull his long legs out behind him. Then he stood his full height in front of the open crematory. Wisps of death-colored smoke rose from his skin. He held her gaze, and his rictus grin twitched wide. His gleaming teeth somehow drizzled with drool.
Can you fix me, Ramona? Make me handsome again? Can you, Ramona?
He moved toward her. With each jerky step, tiny flakes of his skin fell away and turned to black ash when they hit the floor. He left behind a trail of seared footsteps on the tile. Finally, Ramona found her voice. She screamed so hard it left her throat raw. She stumbled back and bumped into her cosmetic tray, spilling makeup and brushes onto the floor. She tore her gaze away from the gruesome monster and saw a pair of gleaming scissors on the counter beside her. She snatched at them, held them out in front of her. "Stop!" she croaked through her raw throat. "Please, stop!"
But I need you, Ramona.
He flicked his tongue between his gleaming teeth. It was coal black. He rubbed it over his charred lips. It made a sandpapery sound. He stopped a foot away and loomed over her, blocking her from moving past him. He looked down onto her upturned face, saw the tears spill from her eyes and drizzle down her cheeks. He reached out and put a hot finger on one of the tears and moaned as his blackened skin absorbed the moisture.
Oh, you can fix me, Ramona. Your tears can fix me.
The searing pain from his touch brought her mind into focus, allowing her to finally act. The scissors made a crunching sound as she stabbed the blades into his chest, where she hoped his heart was. "Get away from me," she said with a quavering voice. Mr. Crispy looked down at the scissors protruding from his chest. He pulled them out and tossed them aside.
That's not how you fix me. Let me taste you.
Then he grabbed her face with his left hand, his touch burning her, and leaned down and licked the tears from her cheeks with his sandpaper dry tongue. She felt him shiver in ecstasy as he tasted her tears. Her stomach surged in disgust at this violation. She tried to pull away, but he was too strong. She mumbled, "Please, God." Mr. Crispy grunted and jerked away as if he had been punched in the face. He growled at her and said,
No.
He let go of her and then reeled away. In rage, he began smashing everything within his reach. He kicked over a tray full of embalming tools. He raked a row of cremation urns from a shelf onto the floor. Just then, the back receiving door was flung open. Both Ramona and Mr. Crispy looked and saw Gordon St. Pierre standing just beyond it in a shaft of pale moonlight. He was holding a white frosted birthday cake topped with carnival-colored sprinkles. If he was shocked at the sight of Mr. Crispy, he did not show it. Instead, the old man stepped boldly into the room. He set the cake on the counter beside the door, then moved to flank the monster that hovered over Ramona. At the sight of the old man, Mr. Crispy stopped his raging. The fact that the old man was unafraid made him take pause. He then turned to Ramona and said,
We're not done, Ramona.
Then he turned and ran out the door into the moonlit night. Gordon wisely didn't move to stop him, but instead slammed the door shut behind him. He quickly slapped the big red button that shut off the crematory, then rushed over to Ramona and wrapped her in a hug. Ramona was strong. She did not cry, but she was shaking. After her shaking subsided, Gordon pulled back and gave her a knowing look. He inspected the welts on her face from where Mr. Crispy had touched her and licked her.
Other than these welts, which I think are going to heal with no scarring, are you okay?
Ramona sighed. Yes, I am. But what are you doing here? Gordon gave her a fatherly smile.
It's your birthday, dear girl. Even though you don't care for such things, I wanted to celebrate with you. I even baked you a cake. Now, tell me what happened.
Ramona recounted the events that led up to his serendipitous arrival. Then she said, I suppose that Mr. Crispy is one of those creatures that you said served death. And that isn't the only thing you were right about.
What do you mean?
Ramona sighed, fully accepting her new awareness of a supernatural reality. When in battle against evil, she said, words do have power. Gordon gave her another one of his fatherly smiles.
Yes, they do.
He then took the birthday cake from the counter and led her to the kitchen. They made calls to Cotton, Elissa, and the brothers. Then, while they waited, they cut slices from the cake and celebrated Ramona's life.